The frozen breath of his horse hung in the air like a ghost, and Zachary Emerson knew that if he did not find shelter soon, both he and the mare beneath him would become part of the Montana wilderness forever. It was December 1883, and the blizzard that had caught him between Buffalo and the open range showed no mercy to man or beast. He had been riding fence lines for the Triple Bar Ranch when the storm swept down from the mountains with a fury that seemed almost personal, turning the world into a whirling white void where sky and earth became indistinguishable. Zachary pulled his wool scarf tighter across his face, ice crystals forming on his mustache and eyelashes as he squinted against the driving snow. His fingers, even wrapped in leather gloves, had long since lost their feeling, and he worried about frostbite. The mare stumbled again, and he patted her neck with one stiff hand, murmuring words of encouragement that were immediately swallowed by the howling wind. He had been a cowboy for 12 years, since he was 18 years old and fresh off a failed farm in Ohio, and in all that time he had never felt death quite so close. Then, through a brief parting in the curtain of snow, he saw it. A thin tendril of gray smoke rising from what looked like a cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile to the east. His heart leaped with hope, though caution tempered his excitement. The old Miller cabin had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the family had packed up and moved to California after losing their cattle to a harsh winter. Nobody should be there, which meant whoever was inside was either a drifter, someone in trouble, or someone looking for trouble. Right now, Zachary did not care which. His survival instincts overrode his wariness as he urged his exhausted horse toward that precious sign of life. The mare seemed to sense shelter ahead, and found a reserve of energy Zachary had not known she possessed, pushing through the deep drifts with renewed determination. As they drew closer, he could make out the dark shape of the cabin more clearly, its log walls barely visible through the storm, the chimney indeed producing that thin stream of smoke that meant warmth, fire, and the possibility of living through the night. He dismounted near what he remembered was a small lean-to stable on the north side of the cabin, his legs nearly buckling as his frozen feet hit the ground. Leading the mare inside, he was grateful to find it still relatively intact, offering at least some protection from the wind. He removed her saddle with clumsy, numb fingers and rubbed her down as best he could with an old piece of burlap he found hanging on a nail. The horse would survive the night here, he thought, though she would be cold and hungry. There was nothing to be done about that now. Zachary made his way to the front door of the cabin, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip, though he doubted he could draw it quickly with his frozen fingers. He knocked, the sound barely audible over the storm, then knocked again harder. When no answer came, he tried the door and found it unlatched. He pushed it open and stepped inside, closing it quickly behind him to keep the warmth in. The interior was dim, lit only by the fire burning in the stone fireplace, but it was blessedly warm. His eyes took a moment to adjust, and when they did, he froze. A woman stood on the far side of the room, pressed against the wall, holding a rifle that was pointed directly at his chest. Even through his surprise and the haze of cold exhaustion, Zachary noticed several things at once. She was young, perhaps 25 or so, with dark auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. Her face was pale but beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes that were a striking shade of green even in the dim light. Those eyes were filled with fear, but also determination. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and there was dried blood on her sleeve. "Do not come any closer," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor he detected. "I will shoot if I have to." Zachary slowly raised his hands, palms out, showing he meant no harm. "Madam, I am not here to hurt you. I got caught in the storm and saw your smoke. I just need shelter until this blows over. I will not bother you, I swear it." She studied him for a long moment, the rifle never wavering. He could see her weighing her options, trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Finally, she lowered the gun slightly, though she kept it ready. "You can stay by the fire," she said, "but keep your distance. I have already had more trouble than I can handle, and I will not hesitate to defend myself." "I understand, madam," Zachary said, moving slowly toward the fireplace. Now that he was inside and could think about something other than freezing to death, his curiosity was piqued. What was a woman doing out here alone in an abandoned cabin during a blizzard? And where had that blood come from? "My name is Zachary Emerson. I work for the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles west of here." "Katherine Ellis," she said after a pause, still watching him carefully. "And before you ask, it is a long story." "We seem to have time," Zachary said, holding his hands toward the fire. The warmth was almost painful as it began to seep into his frozen flesh, and he flexed his fingers, trying to get the blood flowing again. "That storm will not let up until morning at the earliest." Katherine hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She lowered the rifle completely and leaned it against the wall, though she stayed within easy reach of it. "I suppose you have earned an explanation by not freezing to death," she said, a hint of dark humor in her voice. "I was on a stagecoach heading to Buffalo to stay with my aunt. 3 days ago we were robbed by outlaws. They took everything of value and would have done worse if the driver had not tried to fight back. They shot him and the guard. One of the passengers, an older man, tried to help and they shot him too." Zachary felt his jaw tighten. He had heard too many stories like this. The Montana Territory, while more settled than it had been a decade ago, still attracted the worst kind of men. "How did you get away?" "I did not at first," Katherine said, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "They took me with them. Their leader, a man named Cyrus Wolfe, said I would fetch a good price somewhere. I knew what he meant, and I knew I would rather die than let that happen." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Zachary could hear the steel beneath it. This was not a woman who gave up easily. 2 nights ago, they made camp not far from here. They had been drinking, celebrating their take from the stage and another robbery they had pulled before that. I waited until the one guarding me fell asleep. Then I took a knife from his belt and ran. I had no idea where I was going, just knew I had to get away. One of them woke and came after me. We fought. She touched the dried blood on her sleeve. "This is his blood, not mine. I stabbed him and he went down. I do not know if I killed him or not, but I did not stay to find out." Zachary stared at her with a new respect. "You are very brave." "I was very desperate," Katherine corrected. "I stumbled through the dark for hours until I found this cabin. The door was open and there was old firewood stacked inside. I have been here since yesterday afternoon, trying to stay warm and hoping those men would not track me down. The storm started this morning, which I thought might work in my favor. They cannot track what they cannot see." "The storm will cover a lot of sins," Zachary agreed. "But it also means we are stuck here for now." He looked around the cabin, taking inventory. It was a single room, perhaps 20 feet square, with the fireplace on one wall, a small table with 2 chairs, and a wooden bed frame with an old straw mattress in the corner. There were a few supplies on a shelf, probably left by other travelers who had used this place as emergency shelter over the years. "Do you have any food?" "A little," Katherine said. "I found some dried beans and cornmeal in that tin over there. I made a sort of porridge earlier." "It was not very good, but it was warm." Zachary nodded. "I have some jerky in my coat pocket. We can share that and the beans. It will be enough to get us through." He pulled off his heavy coat and hat, hanging them on a peg near the door. His clothes beneath were damp from melted snow, and he moved closer to the fire to dry off. He could feel Catherine's eyes on him, still wary but not as frightened as before. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Zachary studied her when she was not looking, struck by something he could not quite name. There was a quality to Katherine Ellis that drew him in, a combination of strength and vulnerability that touched something deep inside him. He had known many women in his 30 years, had even been close to proposing to a rancher's daughter in Wyoming a few years back, but he had never felt this immediate connection before. It made no sense. They had just met, and under the worst possible circumstances. Yet there it was, an inexplicable pull that made him want to protect her, to know her, to be near her. "Tell me about yourself," Katherine said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Are you married? Do you have family waiting for you?" "No wife," Zachary said. "No family either, not anymore. My parents died of cholera when I was 17. I had a sister, but she passed from fever a few years after that. I have been on my own since then, moving from ranch to ranch, working cattle." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "It is a lonely life sometimes, but it is the only one I know." "I am sorry about your family," Katherine said softly. "I know what it is like to lose people. My parents died when I was 12. My father was killed in the war, the Civil War, fighting for the Union. My mother never recovered from the loss. She just faded away over the next 2 years. I have been living with various relatives since then, never really belonging anywhere." "Is that why you were going to Buffalo? To stay with your aunt?" Katherine nodded. "Aunt Margaret wrote and said I could come live with her. She runs a boarding house there. It is not much, but it would have been a place of my own, a chance to build something. Now I do not know if I will ever make it there." "You will," Zachary said firmly. "Once this storm clears, I will take you to Buffalo myself. Those outlaws will not get another chance at you, I promise you that." She looked at him, and for the first time a small smile touched her lips. "You do not even know me. Why would you make such a promise?" Zachary met her gaze, and in that moment he knew the truth even if he could not explain it. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I want to." The night wore on, and slowly Katherine began to relax. They shared the jerky and some of the beans, talking quietly about their lives, their dreams, their regrets. Zachary told her about the ranches he had worked, the cattle drives he had been on, the wild beauty of the Montana landscape. Katherine told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about how different the East was from this untamed land, about her love of books and her dream of one day having a small library of her own. "There is something about a book," she said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. "It can take you anywhere, make you feel things you never knew were possible. When I was living with my uncle and his family, the only peace I found was in the books I could borrow from the town library. I never learned to read much," Zachary admitted. "A little bit, enough to get by, but not enough to enjoy it the way you describe. My schooling stopped when I was young, and ranch work does not leave much time for studying." "I could teach you," Katherine offered impulsively, then seemed surprised at her own boldness. "I mean, if you wanted to learn. I was a teacher for a year before my uncle decided it was not proper work for an unmarried woman living in his house." "I would like that," Zachary said, and meant it. The idea of spending time with Katherine, of having her teach him, of building something together, even if it was just reading skills, appealed to him more than anything had in a long time. As the hours passed, they moved the chairs closer to the fire and continued talking. Zachary found himself watching the way the firelight played across Katherine's face, The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled. He had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something out of those dime novels he could not read, but something was happening here that he could not deny. It was more than attraction, though he was certainly attracted to her. It was a sense of recognition, as if he had been walking through life half blind and had suddenly gained his vision. This woman, with her courage and her dreams and her quiet strength, was someone he could love, someone he suspected he already was beginning to love. Katherine seemed to feel it too, though she was more guarded, and Zachary could not blame her. After what she had been through, trusting any man would be difficult. But he saw the way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention, saw the softening in her expression, heard the warmth creeping into her voice. They were two lonely souls who had found each other in the middle of a storm, and something real was being born between them. "Tell me something," Katherine said as the night grew late. "If you could have any life you wanted, what would it be?" Zachary thought about it, really thought about it, perhaps for the first time. "I would want a piece of land to call my own," he said slowly. "Not a huge spread, but enough for some cattle, maybe some horses. A good house, sturdy and warm, with a big fireplace like this one. A family." He stopped, suddenly self-conscious. "That probably sounds foolish." "No," Katherine said quietly. "It sounds wonderful. It sounds like a home." "What about you?" Zachary asked. "What would your perfect life be?" "Much the same, I think," Katherine said. "A home, a family, a place to belong. My library of books," she smiled. "A husband who did not think a woman should only cook and clean and have no thoughts of her own." "Any man who thought that about you would be a fool," Zachary said. "You are one of the strongest, most capable people I have ever met, and I have only known you for a few hours." Katherine's cheeks flushed, and she looked away. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Zachary said. "I know you survived something that would have broken a lesser person. I know you have courage and determination. I know you dream of things beyond just surviving day to day. That is more than I know about most people I have worked beside for years." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the silence of two people who had said enough for the moment. Eventually, Katherine's eyelids began to droop, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Zachary stood and gestured to the bed in the corner. "You should sleep," he said. "I will keep the fire going and keep watch." "You need to sleep too," Katherine protested. "You were half frozen when you arrived." "I will sleep later," Zachary assured her. "Right now, I want to make sure we stay warm and that nobody unexpected shows up. Go on, take the bed." "I will be fine in the chair." Too tired to argue, Katherine nodded and moved to the bed. She lay down fully clothed, pulling an old blanket over herself. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Zachary watched her for a moment, then turned back to the fire, adding another log and settling into one of the wooden chairs. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, there was warmth and safety and something else. There was hope, fragile and new but real nonetheless. He must have dozed at some point because he jerked awake to find pale morning light filtering through the cracks in the shutters. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world of white silence. He stood and stretched, his back protesting from a night in the chair, and went to check outside. The snow had drifted up against the cabin door, and it took some effort to push it open. When he did, he was greeted by a landscape transformed. Everything was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh snow, maybe more in the drifts. The sky was clear now, a brilliant blue, and the sun glinted off the snow with a brightness that hurt his eyes. Behind him, he heard Katherine stirring. He turned to find her sitting up, her hair tousled from sleep, looking vulnerable and lovely in the morning light. "Did the storm pass?" she asked. "Yes," Zachary said. "But we have got a lot of snow to deal with. I need to check on my horse and see what we are dealing with as far as getting you to Buffalo." He made his way to the lean-to and was relieved to find his mare alive and well, if hungry and irritated. He brushed her down and gave her some water melted from snow, wishing he had grain to offer but knowing she would have to wait. When he returned to the cabin, Katherine had rekindled the fire and was warming some water for coffee. She had found an old tin of coffee grounds on the shelf, and though they were stale, the smell was heavenly. "I have been thinking," Katherine said as they sat down with their cups. "Those men who took me, Cyrus Wolfe and his gang, they could still be out there. If we travel, we might run into them." "I have been thinking about that too," Zachary admitted. "But staying here is not an option. We have almost no food and I need to get back to the ranch or my boss will think I died in the storm. More importantly, you need to get somewhere safe, somewhere those outlaws cannot find you. Buffalo is the best choice. Once we get there, you will be with your aunt and I can notify the marshal about Wolfe and his gang." "What if we encounter them on the way?" Katherine asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Then I will deal with them," Zachary said grimly. "I am a fair hand with a gun and I will not let them take you again. I give you my word." Katherine searched his face looking for reassurance, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" "As soon as we have eaten something and I have saddled the horse," Zachary said. "The snow will make travel slow, but if we start now, we should reach Buffalo by nightfall, assuming we do not run into trouble." They prepared quickly, eating the last of the beans and packing up what little they had. Zachary saddled his mare and helped Katherine mount, then climbed up behind her. The horse was not happy about carrying double, especially through deep snow, but she was a good mare and did not protest much. Zachary wrapped one arm around Katherine's waist to steady her, and tried to ignore how right it felt to hold her close. They set out, following what Zachary hoped was the old trail toward Buffalo. The snow made everything look different, landmarks buried or transformed, but he had a good sense of direction and the sun to guide him. They rode in silence for the first hour, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The world was eerily quiet, the snow muffling all sound except for the crunch of the horses' hooves and their own breathing. It was around midday when they saw them. 4 riders, dark shapes against the white landscape, coming from the northeast. Zachary tensed and he felt Katherine stiffen in front of him. "Is it them?" she whispered. "I do not know," Zachary said, "but we are not taking chances. Hold on." He urged the mare into a faster pace, which was difficult in the deep snow but necessary. The horse struggled but responded, plunging forward with determination. Behind them, the riders had spotted them and were giving chase. Zachary risked a glance back and cursed under his breath. They were definitely being pursued, and the riders were on fresher horses, gaining ground steadily. "There," Katherine said, pointing ahead. "Is that a ranch?" Zachary looked and felt a surge of relief. It was the McAllister place, a small ranch run by a Scottish immigrant and his 3 sons. If they could reach it, they would have help. He pushed the mare harder, praying she would not stumble in the snow. The horse gave everything she had, her flanks heaving with effort, foam flecking her mouth. They were within shouting distance of the ranch when a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up snow to their left. Katherine cried out in fear and Zachary hunched over her, trying to make them smaller targets. Another shot, this one closer. The ranch house was right ahead now and Zachary could see figures emerging, men with rifles. "Help!" he shouted. "We need help." The McAllister men recognized trouble when they saw it. They raised their rifles and began firing past Zachary and Katherine at the pursuing riders. The covering fire was enough to make the outlaws think twice. They reined in their horses, turned and rode back the way they had come, disappearing into the landscape. Zachary brought the mare to a stop in front of the ranch house, and helping hands reached up to assist Katherine down. He dismounted, his legs shaky from adrenaline, and found himself facing Angus McAllister, a broad-shouldered man of about 50 with red hair going gray and sharp blue eyes. "What in blazes is going on?" McAllister demanded in his thick Scottish accent. Zachary quickly explained, telling him about finding Katherine at the cabin, about her escape from Cyrus Wolfe and his gang, about their flight through the snow. McAllister listened, his expression growing darker with each word. "Wolfe," he spat when Zachary finished. "That devil has been plaguing this territory for 2 years. He and his men are wanted in 3 states. You," he looked at Katherine, "are lucky to be alive, lass." "I know," Katherine said quietly. "Come inside," McAllister said. "Both of you. We will get you warm and fed, and then we will figure out what to do next. My boys will tend your horse." Inside the ranch house, they were greeted by a bustling warmth. Mrs. McAllister, a plump woman with kind eyes, immediately took charge of Katherine, leading her to a room where she could wash and change into clean clothes. One of the McAllister daughters-in-law produced a dress that fit reasonably well, and when Katherine emerged, looking refreshed if still shaken, Zachary felt his heart skip. Over a meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they discussed the situation. McAllister was of the opinion that they should wait a day or 2 before attempting to reach Buffalo, give the outlaws time to move on or assume their quarry had gone to ground. But Zachary shook his head. "With respect, sir, waiting only gives them more time to set up an ambush or to bring in more men. Katherine needs to get to her aunt in Buffalo, and the longer we delay, the more dangerous it becomes. If you could spare a man or 2 to ride with us, we could leave at first light tomorrow." "There is safety in numbers." McAllister considered this, then nodded. "Aye, you have a point. I will send 2 of my sons with you. They know the country well, and they are good shots. Between the 4 of you, those outlaws would be fools to attack." "Thank you," Katherine said, her voice filled with relief. "Thank you so much." That evening, Zachary and Katherine found a moment alone on the porch of the ranch house. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful and peaceful, a stark contrast to the fear and danger of the past few days. "I have been thinking," Katherine said, her breath misting in the cold air, "about what you said last night, about wanting a piece of land, a home, a family. Do you really think that is possible for people like us? People who have nothing?" "I do," Zachary said. "It will not be easy and it will not happen overnight, but I have saved some money over the years. Not a lot, but enough to maybe make a start. And with hard work and determination, I believe anything is possible." He paused, then took a leap. "Katherine, I know we have only known each other for a short time. I know this is probably foolish, but I have to tell you that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. These past 2 days, even with all the danger and fear, have been the most alive I have felt in years. I think I could love you if you would let me. I think maybe I already do." Katherine looked at him, her green eyes shining in the fading light. "I feel it too," she whispered. "It makes no sense. We should be strangers. But when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel like I have come home to a place I did not even know existed. I do not know if it is love, not yet, but it is something. Something real and strong and worth exploring." Zachary reached out and took her hand, and she let him, her fingers curling around his. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding hands and watching the sunset. And in that simple gesture was a promise of something more, something that could grow into everything they had both been searching for. The next morning they set out for Buffalo with the two McAllister sons, Ian and Graham, riding alongside them. The journey was tense but uneventful, the outlaws apparently having decided that the odds were no longer in their favor. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Buffalo spread out in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings along a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, the comforting signs of civilization. Katherine's Aunt Margaret turned out to be a formidable woman in her 60s, tall and thin with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense manner. But when she saw Katherine, her face softened, and she embraced her niece tightly. "Thank God you are safe," she said. "When I got word about the stage being robbed, I feared the worst. Come in, and you," she looked at Zachary, "you must be the young man who rescued my niece. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "No debt," Zachary said. "I was glad to help." Margaret insisted they all come in for a meal, and over dinner, Katherine told her aunt the full story. Margaret listened, her expression moving from horror to anger to admiration as she heard about Katherine's escape and survival. "You are stronger than I gave you credit for," Margaret said. "I am proud of you, Katherine." After the McAllister sons headed back to their ranch with Zachary's heartfelt thanks, Zachary lingered at the boarding house, reluctant to leave. He needed to get back to the Triple Bar Ranch, to report in and collect his wages, but the thought of saying goodbye to Katherine, even temporarily, was painful. Katherine walked him out to the porch when he finally said he had to go. The evening air was cold but clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Katherine asked, her voice small. "I go back to the ranch, let my boss know I am alive, and collect my pay," Zachary said. "Then, if you are willing, I would like to come back to Buffalo. I would like to court you properly, Katherine Ellis. I would like to see if what we both felt in that cabin was real, or just two people finding comfort in a storm." "I already know it is real," Katherine said softly, "but I would like you to come back anyway. I would like to get to know you better, to see where this could go." Zachary smiled, and before he could think better of it, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. It was a brief kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. When he pulled back, Katherine was smiling too. "I will be back within the week," he promised. "Wait for me." "I will wait," Katherine said. True to his word, Zachary returned to Buffalo 6 days later. He had explained everything to his boss at the Triple Bar, who had been relieved to learn that Zachary was alive and well. More than that, when Zachary asked about cashing out and moving on, the boss had understood. "You have got that look," he had said. "The look of a man who has found something worth staying put for. Good luck to you, Emerson." With his savings and his final wages, Zachary had enough to make a start on his dream. He began looking for land near Buffalo, something small but with potential. He also began courting Katherine in earnest, visiting her at her aunt's boarding house, taking her to church socials and town dances, walking with her along the main street on sunny afternoons. Margaret approved of Zachary, seeing in him a good man who would treat her niece well. She even helped him find a small parcel of land for sale, just 5 miles outside of town, with a creek running through it and good grazing land. It was affordable barely, but it was his. Theirs, he hoped, over the winter months, Zachary and Katherine's relationship deepened. They talked about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future. Katherine taught him to read better, patiently working with him in the evenings, and Zachary shared his knowledge of the land and animals with her. They laughed together and dreamed together, and by the time spring arrived, thawing the frozen earth, Zachary knew with absolute certainty that Katherine was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. He proposed on a warm April evening in 1884. taking her out to the land he had purchased. He had started building a small house there, working on it every spare moment, and though it was far from finished, the frame was up and the roof was on. "This is going to be our home," he said, standing with Katherine in what would one day be the main room. "If you will have me. Katherine Ellis, will you marry me? Will you build this life with me, make this house a home, and be my wife?" Katherine's eyes filled with tears, happy tears this time, and she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you. I will build this life with you. I love you." "I love you too," Zachary said, and kissed her there in the half-built house, with the evening sun streaming through the gaps in the walls and the sound of the creek babbling nearby. They were married a month later in the small church in Buffalo, with Aunt Margaret standing as witness and most of the town turning out for the celebration. It was a simple ceremony, but it was everything they needed. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Zachary kissed his bride, he felt a joy so complete that it almost overwhelmed him. This woman, who he had found in a cabin during a snowstorm, who had survived so much and remained so strong, was now his wife, his partner, his love. The first year of marriage was not easy. They were building everything from scratch, and there was so much work to be done. Zachary took on jobs around Buffalo to earn extra money, while Katherine worked alongside him on their property, helping to finish the house, plant a garden, and tend the small herd of cattle they had managed to purchase. She proved to be as capable as he had known she would be, never complaining about the hard work or the long hours. But there were beautiful moments, too. Evenings sitting on their porch watching the sunset, Zachary's arm around Katherine's shoulders. Mornings waking up next to her, still amazed that she was his. Quiet afternoons when they would stop work to simply be together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses. The reading lessons continued, and by the end of that first year, Zachary could read well enough to enjoy the books Katherine loved so much. She built a small shelf for her growing collection, and they would often read together by lamplight in the evenings. News came that spring that Cyrus Wolfe and his gang had been caught in Wyoming and hung for their crimes. When Zachary told Katherine, he saw relief wash over her face. That chapter of her life was truly closed now, and she could move forward without fear. In the fall of 1885, Katherine told Zachary she was pregnant. He was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. They had talked about children, both wanting them, but the reality of it was overwhelming. What if he was not a good father? What if something went wrong? But Katherine, practical as always, reassured him. "We will figure it out together," she said, "just like we have figured out everything else." Their son was born in May of 1886, a healthy baby with Zachary's dark hair and Katherine's green eyes. They named him James, after Zachary's father, and from the moment Zachary held his son for the first time, he was lost. This tiny person, so dependent and trusting, was his and Katherine's. The love he felt was fierce and protective, and unlike anything he had ever experienced. Katherine was a natural mother, patient and loving, but also practical. She handled the sleepless nights and endless demands of a newborn with the same determination she brought to everything else. Zachary helped as much as he could, learning to change diapers and rock James to sleep, marveling at how quickly his son grew and changed. The ranch continued to grow too. With careful management and hard work, they increased their herd and were able to hire a part-time hand to help with the heavy work. They added on to the house, building a proper bedroom for themselves and a nursery for James. Katherine's library grew, filling 2 shelves now, and she began teaching reading to some of the children in Buffalo, holding classes in her home twice a week. Life was good, better than Zachary had ever dreamed possible. On their third wedding anniversary, he told Katherine as much. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said, holding her close as they stood on their porch, watching the sun set over their land. James was inside, asleep in his cradle, and for this moment it was just the two of them. "Thank you for saying yes to me. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for finding me," Katherine said, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "Thank you for being the man you are. I love you, Zachary Emerson, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Zachary thought about that snowy day when he had seen smoke from an abandoned cabin and decided to investigate. It had been the luckiest decision of his life. He had gone into that cabin half frozen and alone and come out with his future. With his everything. 2 more children followed over the next years, a daughter they named Rose in 1888 and another son, Michael, in 1890. The house grew louder and more chaotic, filled with the sounds of children playing and learning and occasionally fighting. Zachary loved every moment of it, even the difficult ones. He taught his children to ride and to work the land, while Katherine taught them to read and write and think. Together, they created a home full of love and laughter. The town of Buffalo grew too, becoming more settled and prosperous. Zachary became known as a reliable rancher and a good man, someone people could count on. Katherine's teaching expanded, and she helped establish a proper school in town, though she continued to teach reading from her home as well. They became pillars of the community, respected and liked. Aunt Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives until her death in 1895, and when she passed, she left the boarding house to Katherine. They sold it and used the money to buy more land and cattle, further securing their future. As the new century approached, Zachary and Katherine would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their children play in the yard and marvel at how far they had come. From 2 lost souls finding each other in a storm to this, a family, a home, a life full of love and purpose. "Do you remember that night in the cabin?" Katherine asked one such evening, "when you said you wanted land and a family?" "Every detail," Zachary said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful and bravest woman I had ever seen. I remember knowing, even then, that you were going to change my life." "I remember being terrified," Katherine admitted. "Terrified of those outlaws, terrified of you at first, terrified of what was going to happen to me. But then you started talking, and I felt something shift. I felt hope for the first time in days. You gave me that, Zachary. You gave me hope, and then you gave me everything else." "We gave it to each other," Zachary corrected gently. "None of this would exist without both of us." Katherine smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "No, I suppose it would not." Their children grew into fine young adults. James became a rancher like his father, eventually taking over most of the day-to-day operations of the Emerson ranch. Rose, who had inherited her mother's love of learning, became a teacher herself, opening a school in a neighboring town. Michael, the youngest and most adventurous, joined the cavalry and served with distinction before returning home to help his brother run the ranch. Zachary and Katherine grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated their 25th anniversary in 1909, surrounded by their children and a growing number of grandchildren. The house Zachary had built had been expanded multiple times, and was now a sprawling, comfortable home that was always full of family. On their 30th anniversary in 1914, Zachary took Katherine back to the old Miller cabin where they had met. It was still standing, though even more dilapidated now. They went inside, and Zachary built a fire in the old fireplace, just as it had been burning that snowy night 3 decades before. "This is where it all started," he said, putting his arm around his wife. They were both in their 50s now, gray threading through their hair, lines on their faces that spoke of years lived fully. But when Katherine looked at him, Zachary still saw the beautiful, brave young woman he had fallen in love with, and he knew she saw the same in him. "This is where I found you," Katherine corrected. "Or you found me, I am still not sure which." "Does it matter?" Zachary asked. "No," Katherine said, smiling. "I suppose it does not. All that matters is that we found each other." They sat together in the cabin for a while, remembering and reminiscing, then headed back to their ranch, to their family, to the life they had built together. It had not been an easy life, but it had been a good one. A life full of hard work and love, challenges and triumphs, sorrow and joy. As the years continued to roll by, Zachary and Katherine remained devoted to each other and to their family. They watched with pride as their grandchildren grew, as the ranch prospered, as the legacy they had built together continued to flourish. In their later years, they spent more and more time on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to tame. They talked about their past, about that fateful snowy day, about all the decisions and circumstances that had led them to each other. They agreed that everything, even the bad things Katherine had endured, had been worth it because it had led them here, to this life, to this love. Zachary Emerson died peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 75, with Katherine holding his hand. His last words to her were, "Thank you for the best 44 years of my life." Katherine lived another 7 years, passing away in 1935 at the age of 77. In those years without Zachary, she was cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. And though she missed her husband terribly, she took comfort in the family they had created and the legacy they were leaving behind. She was buried next to Zachary on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Katherine and Zachary Emerson, beloved parents and grandparents, together forever." The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, and the story of how Zachary had found Katherine in a snowstorm, how they had fallen in love against all odds, became a cherished family legend told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The old Miller cabin eventually collapsed into ruin, reclaimed by the Montana wilderness, but its place in the Emerson family history was secure. It was the birthplace of a love story that had lasted a lifetime, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with something as simple as seeing smoke rising from an abandoned cabin in the snow and having the courage to investigate. Through the decades that followed, the Emerson descendants continued to thrive in Montana. James's great-grandson eventually wrote a book about Zachary and Katherine's story, based on journals Katherine had kept and stories passed down through the family. It became a minor bestseller in the 1970s, touching readers with its tale of courage, survival, and enduring love. The land Zachary and Katherine had worked so hard to build into a successful ranch remained in the family into the 21st century, a testament to their vision and determination. And somewhere in the family home, on a shelf built by Zachary's own hands, Katherine's beloved collection of books remained, a reminder of her dreams and the life she had built with the cowboy, who had saved her from a snowstorm and given her everything she had ever wanted. Their story was one of the Old West, of a time when life was hard and survival was never guaranteed, but also of timeless truths, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that two people could find each other against all odds, and that with courage, determination, and devotion, anything was possible. It was a story that began with smoke rising from a cabin in the snow and ended with a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Zachary had been right that first night when he told Katherine he thought he could love her. He had loved her, deeply and truly, for the rest of his life. And Katherine, who had been so frightened and alone when he found her, had loved him back with equal devotion. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but something far more precious. They had built a life full of meaning, purpose, and love, a life that neither of them could have imagined that snowy December night in 1883, when fate brought them together in an abandoned cabin in Montana. Their love had been tested by hardship and time, and it had not just endured but flourished, growing stronger with each passing year, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who knew their story. In the end, theirs was the greatest success story of all, not measured in wealth or fame but in love shared, family cherished, and a life lived fully and well together.